Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Rich Fernandez from the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. We're going to give it about 5 or 10 seconds to let all of the participants join on the Zoom call so that everybody is together. So let's just give it about 5 or 10 seconds here. We have quite a number of participants. Welcome again. Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. As I said earlier, my name is Rich Fernandez. I'm the CEO of the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. And we're so happy and excited today to share with you some of the insights from some of our key partners, particularly Yves from Hyatt and Miroo from Facebook, really to discuss this topic of growing a culture of mindfulness within organizations. For us, mindfulness and emotional intelligence are core capabilities that we seek to build in the organizations we work with and that our teachers around the world work with. So I'll tell you a little bit more about the context, but because the topic is mindfulness, what's critical for us is to not only talk about mindfulness, but to actually exercise that capacity for ourselves. And one of the things we like to do is to actually invite participants in our different programs or on calls like this to just take a few moments together to practice with us. So what I'd like to invite you to do is do some practice that we call a minute to arrive. This is a global call, so all of you are in different time zones, whether it's the beginning, middle, or end of your day. And one of the things that often happens is that we experience kind of the frantic nature of our mind, which is sometimes in the past or sometimes in the future, but sometimes a little less here in the present moment. So what I'd like to do is, again, invite you to this practice. Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay on the slide. There you go. Called a minute to arrive. And this is really just taking a minute here before we begin to anchor yourself in this present moment. And what I mean by that is to connect with your body and with your breath, to train your attention to be in this moment together, rather than in the past meeting or what you have to do in the near future. So if you'd like, I'd invite you to sit or stand in a way that's alert but relaxed at the same time, whatever that means for you. And if you'd like, you can close your eyes or just soften your gaze. And just take this minute to connect with the felt sense of your body. Check in with your body. Check in with your breath. Notice the air coming in and out of your body. And just take notice of your mental or emotional state at the moment. How are you feeling? What is happening in your mind at the moment? What's the quality of thought or attention? Reconnecting with your breath again, with your body. And as we draw this exercise to a close, I just invite you to take 3 slightly deeper breaths at your own pace. And as you're ready, rejoin the larger group. So thank you for your attention. Again, that is one of the micro practices that we always like to offer people. It's called a minute to arrive. So before we dive in, I wanted to give you a little bit of context and a framing for today. So again, we're from the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, and my colleague Steph Stern, who's a director here at our institute, is online, and she'll be helping facilitate as well. My name again is Rich Fernandez. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of quick context about the institute. We're a not-for-profit institute that was actually originally developed at Google. I was formerly the director of executive education at Google. And in my time there, a number of colleagues developed this curriculum that really keyed on three core aspects of kind of human performance, if you will, and well-being. The first being neuroscience, the notion that our brains can actually change its structure and function, and that you can do so through a set of mental habits, mental training, that could eventually lead to greater emotional intelligence. So in many ways, this institute, or the curriculum that was developed at Google, keyed on these three things. We eventually spun off a separate nonprofit institute from Google, with Google's permission, to now offer this curriculum to organizations and communities around the world. And our special guests today are certified teachers of this in their specific organizations, being Facebook and Hyatt, which we'll get into shortly. So our institute works in over 50 countries. We'll have over 700 teachers in 50 countries by the end of 2020, and in sector diverse organizations. Not just tech anymore, of course, but all sorts of organizations from manufacturing to healthcare. We work with a number of universities as well. And one of the main things we do is we train and certify teachers of mindfulness and emotional intelligence using that Google curriculum. And then they go out and they offer that curriculum and those teachings and methodology to their own organizations or communities around the world. We've even trained whole governments. For example, we're training the entire federal government of the nation of Bhutan on this methodology. It's a kind of contemporary neuroscience-based approach to mindfulness and emotional intelligence. And with that, I'm thrilled to invite our special guests here today, because both Yves and Miroo are certified teachers of the SIY mindfulness-based emotional intelligence curriculum. And both of them are really bringing SIY, mindfulness and emotional intelligence tools into their respective organizations in really interesting and unique ways. So first of all, Yves and Miroo, welcome. I'm so glad you can join us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and we at the Institute are based here in the Bay Area, so is Miroo, so we're here you know, in the morning time, but Yves is dialing in the evening from Zurich, so thank you for that as well. In terms of the flow of this time together with all of you online as well, we have a few questions for Miroo and Yves, but we also want to open it up. So Steph, I'm just going to ask you, if listeners are maybe not familiar with Zoom, to just explain a little bit how they might be able to you know, send in some questions.
Sure, thanks, and welcome everyone. It's really amazing to have so many people online here with us today. So if you're new to Zoom, you'll notice when you move your mouse, there should be a bottom bar that pops up that gives you some options. And one option should say chat, and that should pop up a little chat window. And you can chat either directly to me, Steph Stern, or to everyone. And that's a great way to ask questions as we go along. And I'll be sort of translating and inserting those questions into the conversation as we go. You can also raise your hand, and that's in the participant window. So if you go to participants, there should be a little raise hand icon. And if you raise your hand, I can unmute you when we get to the Q&A portion, and you'll have a chance to ask your question there as well. And if you have any questions, or if Zoom is not working, chat is the best way to connect and just ask me what might be going on. If something feels totally broken, you might just log out and come back in and restart. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Steph. So our intention today, why we wanted to tell you about the chat and the ways to ask questions, of course, is because our intention today is really to make this interactive, certainly to hear insights from our guests, but also make it interactive. So for the first 20 minutes or so, you know, we have these questions. We'll ask Yves and Miroo and have a conversation with them. And then for the second half of the webinar, we'll throw it wide open for you to ask any questions that might come up for you. All right, so with that, I would actually like to just start the conversation with both you, Yves and Miroo. Maybe the first thing I would ask is, what inspired you to bring mindfulness into your organization?
Would you want to start?
Okay, why don't you go ahead, Yves, since it's late and we want to make sure you stay awake.
Well, I'm in a lucky position. I work in the hospitality industry. I work for a hotel chain. And I think we're an industry, we are predestined for mindfulness. It's an industry that deals with people, not only guests, but we deal with owners, we deal with communities, we deal with a large amount of employees. And I think mindfulness is just something that really sits really well in our industry. And it really helped us in getting a few things across over the last year where mindfulness has really played an important role for us.
Great, thank you. And what about you, Miroo? It's such a different industry. So tell us about how you got started with all of this.
Yeah, in my case, it started with my personal problems. So I've been working in tech industry my entire career for 15 years across Apple, Microsoft, and Facebook. And the burnout or in this hyper competitive and then hyper intensive industry is real. So personally, I got a lot of help from it. And since I spent so much time at work, I wanted to bring it to workplace too as a result of that. And I also noticed a lot of the similar problems and patterns from my coworkers. So I gathered that I had a hunch that this is probably an industry or the company-wide phenomena. So I wanted to bring it so that we can, be happier at work and also do our job better in with our well-being. So that's kind of how we all started.
Yeah, interesting. And then as you see here on this question page, in some ways you've kind of already started talking to points 1 and 2. One question we often hear is, how should I talk about this? How do I position this to bring it into my organization? People aren't ready for it. People think it's a little like woo-woo. So how did you position it? Yves, how did you position the mindfulness offering at Hyatt?
Yeah, it was very interesting when I started talking about it. It gave the word naked a very different meaning. I felt very naked at the beginning. And I think the one way I managed to get across to leaders in the organization was by anchoring mindfulness and emotional intelligence in a variety of processes and philosophies that are already present in the company. For example, can we anchor it in our values? Can we anchor it in our purpose? Can I take emotional intelligence and see, well, what are the kind of emotional intelligence competencies that are already part of our leadership competency model? How can I anchor mindfulness in other processes like innovation or in inclusion and diversity, in learning, in resilience? So for us, it was really about making sure I don't roll out an initiative, but I roll out like a cultural competency that I can anchor in a variety of areas within the organization. And that's that moment we managed to do that. That's when people started to listen and actually appreciating what we were teaching them.
That's wonderful. Yves, I know that, and Miroo, you'll be happy to hear this, we have kind of a Facebook cohort for our community, and I know that I had seen Yves had run an offsite for leaders in Hyatt, and you had created, Yves, kind of almost a hand-drawn flip chart that showed that connectivity to the priorities and values of the organization. And I remember you posted on Facebook, and I asked you, can we share it? Can we show it?
Sure.
Mind if I put that up now? I have it on the next slide to illustrate what you're talking about.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So tell us about this.
Yeah, I was just looking first if there was no spelling mistake in here. Again, I think for us, this is something we're drawing up all at the beginning of the session, because as we were going through the program over 2 days, we could relate back to it and make it real for people, where we said, fine, if we take mindfulness as a starting point, for us, showing empathy and using empathy within leadership is very important. Because we have a purpose in the organization where we say we care for people so they can be their best. And care is really all-encompassing. It's for our employees, our guests, our owners, communities, suppliers, vendors. And if you dissect the word care, it just comes down to empathy and compassion. And sometimes I would even use compassion it could nearly substitute care to a degree. So it's always nice to go out and talk to people about empathy, but people always ask, well, how do I develop empathy? And our program has really done a good job making this really accessible to people, to explain what empathy is, what can I do to go from empathy to care, and how can I develop that? And at the same time, also moving that soft skill a little bit more into the leadership area, where we said, but where does emotional intelligence sit? And research has shown that emotional intelligence does develop leadership, stellar performance, and happiness, which is really the highest level of well-being, which again then connects to our purpose. So the whole story always made sense, and over the whole 2 days of the program, we consistently could really link back to this, which made it really real for participants.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's a very clear illustration. And Miroo, what about for you? What was this journey like at Facebook?
Yeah, so we was saying that at Facebook that our journey is at 1% done. So I feel like it's always kind of a beginning, and then it's a good reminder to keep the beginner's mind. And there are so many things to do. But at Facebook, it's like many tech companies, it's a very mission-driven company. So for us as well, the people has been the sort of the focus of the company for since the beginning of the company as well. I've been at Facebook for about 6 years now, so I've seen the sort of the journey of that Facebook has been on for a while now. And the way we thought about this, and again, I'm also co-leader for the mindfulness group Facebook, and this is sort of our mission statement for this group, a mindfulness group at Facebook. And we think about mindfulness as the core thing for well-being. So, and well-being is not just being happy; it's an experience of health, happiness, and prosperity. And it includes having good physical and mental health, and also job or life satisfaction and sense of meaning and purpose too. And this well-being in a way applies to everyone related with Facebook. So people inside Facebook, employees who work at Facebook, and people who use Facebook and the family of product and services such as Instagram, WhatsApp. So users, and also people who work with Facebook, so our communities. So these are all people, and to bring the well-being to these three groups of people, we thought that mindfulness is really instrumental and critical. And as a co-leader, we decided to approach a lot of grassroots activities, but two things really stood out. One is a kind of focus on the data, so showing the impact through the data that's proven in other companies, because it's a very data-driven company to the Facebook audience. So that so there's a sticky point that comes with it, and also this grassroots activities actually kind of drives well with the culture here, because it's a very much of a trying out and see what sticks. So this prototyping sort of a culture has been very kind of welcoming this sort of a trial out. So it's a 1% done. This journey is 1% done, but yeah. So the slide that's showing now is like basically kind of showing our how we think about the mindfulness and emotional intelligence at Facebook. But then, and this is how it's tied to the entire Facebook mission. And but in terms of so we think that mindfulness is really contributing to this Facebook mission eventually by focusing on these three groups of people, through the approaches such as data-driven focus and then prototyping way of trying out different classes and different modules.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. And thanks for illustrating the different touch points, the employees, the users, the communities on Facebook. I have a question that I'll return to about that later. I just wanted to kind of go through this list here because there's a few things that we know are often themes for people. The next set of questions are somewhat related, which is how did you navigate to find the right sponsors, decision makers, and what kind of resistance did you encounter? If you'd like, Miroo, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is the ongoing effort. So I want to just everyone to know that I'm not speaking from the state that everything is great and rosy. It's quite a rocky road, but going really well. The way I navigate right now is to really kind of meet the people in the teams where they are. So we are trying to find the trouble points or the problem statements that each team has. And it could be that the team is having a lot of burnout issues. It could be that they want to be more productive by improving the attention. So the problem can vary. So SIY has a lot of modules that actually speak to these problems. So right now I'm navigating by meeting the teams where they are with the specific problems they have. And also that kind of builds up that grassroots momentum. And so it's kind of going step by step for starting from the bottom and then top to the top. And also there are this community focus now that Facebook has. So I'm also kind of gaining the sort of a demand from the community focused teams because they understand that social intelligence is based on the emotional intelligence after all to drive this Facebook communities as well. So that's now tied to the company mission. So that's kind of I would say kind of there are two bottoms up and then top down method coming in all together. But yeah, so that's kind of what's going on right now.
Okay, thank you. And what about for you, Yves? How did you navigate, find sponsorship, and what resistance are you meeting?
Well, probably the biggest resistance you will get is convincing the HR guy.
That's you.
And that's me. So I think I had a competitive advantage here. But I think it's, I remember the first time I went out there and I went to a leadership meeting and I said, let me just try this out. And I had a room of 25 senior leaders and we were talking about growth mindset. And I said, well, let me just bring in a little exercise, a practice around that, which took about 10 minutes. And as I was going through the practice, I had from the 25 people, probably about 15 people who had their eyes closed, they had lowered their gaze, were participating. I had about 5 of them who were fairly disinterested, looking around the room, and I had 5 of them continued to type on their laptops. And I think the one thing I learned was you have to meet people where they are. And if you're persistent, like 2 months later, I had a very similar meeting and I said, I'm not going to give up. And I went in, I did a similar session, and now I had 20 people participating. And I had 5 people sitting there. Nobody was working on the laptop. And for me, that was a really big learning on how I managed to get in there. And being consistent and keeping on passing the same message and showing little successes was very helpful for us. I never formally went to see my boss. It actually went very organically, where my boss, who is the group president, came into a session one day, and after the session said, Yves, you're really good at that. And that was just about it. And we've continued to doing it. And we're like Miroo, we're at the beginning stage. In my region, I've trained up probably about just below 500 people so far. And in the context of 35,000, that's not a lot. But we start using the language. We start understanding the concepts. I've got people reaching out to me and says, Yves, can we build this into our meetings? How can we make a meeting more mindful? I've got the sales organization reaching out to me and say, Yves, you talked about resilience. How can we help our salespeople to become more resilient? So slowly, it's not just only about running a 2-day program, but it's about really looking at mindfulness and emotional intelligence as concepts and how we can use those concepts to make better employees, make them more comfortable with what they do, help them with what to do, help their own well-being, and maybe teach them something they, like myself, might become passionate about.
Wonderful, thank you. And I see there's many questions flying in via chat, so I promise you we will get to them. So let's just, because a couple of remaining bullet points tend to be themes that we've heard over and over. And so let's maybe just address those last few ones, and then we'll open it up for questions for the whole second half hour of this call. So for either of you, what kind of impact are you seeing, to the extent you are? And any surprises in that?
I can go first.
Yeah.
The impact has been at individual level. The people, as I've taught so far, about 6 search intensive classes at Facebook, and unanimously every time, every individual who has been participating in the class shares that the change in their attitude, in their stress level. So that's anecdotal report, but at the same time, we have some data points that we can prove before and after the training. So over and over, it has proven that this does have an individual impact in a positive way to increase the well-being. So that's been great. And then the bigger impact is that one thing leads to another. There's sort of this ripple effect inside the organizations that more and more team needs it. So now a lot of teams are asking for a special session, like a 1-hour session about search inside yourself, so that they can bring this mindfulness to their team setting, like Yves was talking about, incorporate it to their meetings. And the beauty of the SIY training has been that there are a lot of micro practices that we can integrate in day-to-day, in between meetings, etc. So those have been very sticky and working very well. So creating this sort of a smaller level of the organization changes, I think, increasing the organizational level of awareness. So that, I think that's the good impact now, still ongoing, and then I'm hoping to see more. The surprise is, for the longest time, I've been practicing meditation seriously, personally, for the last 6 years, and I've always thought that this is my personal thing. I shouldn't, I didn't know how to mingle it. And since I started bringing SIY to the organization, I'm just surprised the common humanity in it, in terms of the needs for this. So everybody needs it. And as an organization, with all these people, we need it so much. So maybe it's not a surprise for you, Rich, but it just confirms over and over there are a lot of pains and then a lot of sufferings inside organizations, and as an organization too, that we need this. So that's been surprising to me.
Yeah, and I have just a quick follow-on question there, Miroo, specifically about Facebook. As you're starting to see, do you think that this in any way could influence the organization itself, especially, we've read a lot about scrutiny around data collection, privacy, just kind of, and this is not just about Facebook, this is really about any business. Can this start to have an effect on the organization's model, their business model, their way of doing business, their users or customers? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is. I think it all starts from that personal awareness, that self-awareness, that do we know what we're doing exactly? And it's not that I cannot speak for all the things that we're under media scrutiny, but I don't think it's ill-intentioned to begin with, but maybe a lot of things might have been started with a lack of self-awareness or lack of organizational awareness. I think that with these practices, as we increase the self-awareness and then organizational awareness, I think it will definitely have an impact or some influence over how we think about the product. And that's why in the 3 buckets, that people who are on Facebook, our users, are also kind of one of the buckets that we, as a co-leader for the mindfulness group, I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What about you, Yves? What about impacts or anything that surprised you?
Probably the most surprising thing was the interest and current level of practice a lot of people already have. I mean, at one stage I thought, well, there's me, I'm all by myself, and I'm going to be all naked in front of these 50 people. And then I asked the first question, I said, okay, so who has heard about mindfulness? And has anybody practiced mindfulness? And has anybody practiced regularly? And every time I'm absolutely amazed by the number of hands that stay up. And that just makes it much easier because you have people that relate what you're talking about. So for me, that was really something that was not something I had expected. What works? I think people start integrating the practices because a lot of people, they practice mindfulness, but sitting down 10 minutes in the morning doesn't necessarily do the trick. I think the one thing that we teach that really resonates with people is that for every dedicated practice, I've got an integrated practice. And this is probably the one thing that people really take home with them. I have people calling me up and say, you know what, Eva, for the first time I walked to work this morning, practicing open awareness, and I noticed the trees. And I said, so how long have you been walking to work? He said, 5 years. So it's amazing. And a lot of the evidence we have is still anecdotal at this stage. We haven't really managed to isolate specific KPIs, other than the questionnaires that we use through the Search Inside Yourself program, where we can see considerable moves between the pre and post surveys. But you can really see how a lot of people embrace it. Some of them are quiet. They wouldn't necessarily talk about it, or they might talk to me. I see a lot of ambassadors out there who say, you know what, I want to help you with it. And again, one of the things we learn in Search Inside Yourself is if you want to get motivated, you have to talk to people about it. And I did talk to people about it, and people are coming on board. They like what we're doing. They say it's the message from the head of HR that soft skills are important, just plays a very important role in the organization. And a lot of people who are known as maybe the more hard leaders or the more harsh leaders, they've started to becoming a little bit more empathetic around their leadership and using some of the skills they learned little by little in the way they're leading their teams. So definitely I can see a lot of change, but it's a long journey.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you both. And I know we have many questions that have come in through chat, so I'm going to ask Steph if you could moderate those and start offering them up for our guests.
Sure, and it's a lot of great conversation that's happening over chat, so please keep it going. It's wonderful. A lot of really interesting questions. One of the first ones that came up was, is it always advisable to sort of start at the top and get really senior buy-in first, or are there other ways to start a mindfulness initiative in an organization?
Great question. I have an interesting opinion on that one. And I say I try to touch whoever I can. But yes, you do need a certain level of buy-in so you can actually do the work. It doesn't help me if I don't get support from my boss to doing it. So there has to be a level of buy-in that is okay what we're doing. But after that, I think you have to look at where can you anchor it. And I'm looking for, and again, I'm convinced of what I'm doing and that it's something that helps people. And I proactively look for opportunities to anchor it somewhere, whether that is working with our head of inclusion and diversity to see how can we create concepts around mindful inclusion, or working with our innovation team about how can we help developing resilience for people when they do design thinking, or working with leadership development and we say, okay, we've got a competency that says be present, so how can we foster that competency? So I'm really proactively looking for those opportunities of where we can bring the work in on whatever level that is. Whether I'm going to be working with a group of developers on a specific emotional intelligence skill, or going to work with a larger group around general leadership skills, or an overall Search Inside Yourself program. So yes, buy-in is important so you can do the work. But once you can do the work, you just have to look for opportunities, and it has to make sense. You don't want to spray and pray either. There has to be a strategy behind it on how you want to anchor it, and that's a bit where my slide also came from earlier on. But then you can go at any level.
Yeah, I will echo mostly what Yves said. This is where actually my day job comes in. I'm a business development manager, so I do manage a lot of pipelines. So I think of this as kind of pipeline opportunities. So who am I talking to? Which team are they? So I'm trying to be strategic about that too. But starting with people, meeting people where they are, whether they are just individuals or certain teams, even though they're not actually necessarily the senior executive, meeting where they are is actually important because to test the water. So understand what the real problems is. And then there could be some patterns or some commonalities that I can identify, which I can speak, kind of customize the SOI language to those problems and tailor that that way. But then as I think about this like strategic pipelines, I also try to be skillful in terms of who to talk to. If that gives me an opportunity to speak to a certain leader in a certain organization, then I'm never missing the chance to. So I would say it's not necessarily, it does have to be start with the top. If it happens that way, maybe it could be good, but I think also it depends on the organization's the type and the culture too.
Thanks. Yeah, that's super interesting, and it definitely echoes what we see generally with Silly's clients. Really helpful to get that top level buy-in. At some point, it's really needed to scale a program and to just get started. Sometimes it's a team, lead that just wants to bring it in for their smaller team or something like that. And it can be helpful. Some of the other comments that we've been seeing have been around, what about also starting with kind of a regular meditation group or practice, something that can be really grassroots, and that can be super helpful to really cultivate. Even as you were saying, people kind of come out of the woodworks and say, oh, I have a practice already, that haven't been talking about it. So it's a great way of gaining those allies and seeing what interest and expertise is already in your organization. So really nice. Another big question or set of questions that has come up in chat is around metrics. How do you actually show that this is working? What are you paying attention to track success from these programs? Miroo, do you want to tackle that first, of how you're thinking about success?
So right now, this is actually literally the problem that I'm thinking right now. So I'm trying to connect so there's a matrix that I definitely measure before and after the SRI training. I'm trying to find a point to connect that to actually the internal KPIs, because right now my first demographic, first target is the people inside Facebook for this program. So there are some customizations or tailoring that has to happen. But I think in terms of employees, the resilience and burnout, reducing the burnout has been an important sort of a topic internally. So wherever the SOI can bring in terms of the help to increase the resiliency and then reduce the burnout, that's actually the metrics that we should go after. And yeah, so it's kind of a ongoing process. So I'm still thinking about this, how to actually tie that to the company KPIs. And so I will share it as much as this.
Yeah, and just for the listeners, if you're not familiar, of course, KPIs are key performance indicators.
Sorry.
So tying, for example, the pre-post metrics and doing some analysis and seeing how they, deliver against the certain key performance indicators, such as burnout, resilience, and certainly other business metrics.
Thank you.
Well, for us as well, like I said earlier, we don't really track KPIs as of yet. We look at the pre and post surveys of our programs, since we can register those. And again, we see the movements, how people self-report the changes pre and post program. I get invited a lot for lunch because people want to learn more about it. So that's one of my own KPIs. But I think it's, when probably people want to know about how you put a business case together, because that's where everything starts. And I think Search Inside Yourself has some really good case studies, whether it's around SAP or some of the other organizations. I use the same. I know how the program can influence KPIs like absenteeism, potentially healthcare cost, engagement. So that's definitely something that we use as well. I've also started tracking one of our questions in our engagement survey around listening, where I've launched with a number of hotels a couple of tools around mindful listening, just to see whether we actually manage to move the needle. So I think sometimes we also have to start small and just see, okay, what is it we want to move? And how can mindfulness help us with it? I'm working with our inclusion department to see how we can bring mindfulness into our inclusion training. So it's not just an unconscious bias training, but it's also something that actually helps people to realize that we have biases and how can we make them more conscious, and then how that relates also to our inclusion results. So I've got a few things out there. I don't have a scorecard yet, but I think it's something that we're working on to sort of see how impactful mindfulness and emotional intelligence actually can be in our organization.
Thank you. And if I might, I wanted to share an anecdote from my own experience, because 10 years ago, I was the head of global learning at eBay, and we were also starting to offer mindfulness there. It was a different point in time where mindfulness was less well known in organizations. And I started just like offering some small workshops, group gatherings, but I definitely surveyed the participants on pre-post. And in that pre-post survey, I included, as you were saying, Yves, certain items that addressed employee engagement concerns, like how much does this workshop help you feel connected to the organization? How much does this help you feel like the organization cares about your well-being? And the scores that came out were really strong. And I brought those to my executive sponsors, who asked me, why are you doing this mindfulness stuff? And I said, well, here's the data I have. It suggests that it might be a useful experiment. And so I was encouraged to continue the experiment. So there's a way to be scrappy and to combine metrics with, finding the right sponsors as well. I think maybe that's the takeaway I wanted to share. I know there's many other questions flying in, Steph. Are there other themes that are surfacing?
Yeah, so one specific question is just kind of what exact practices are you guys bringing into Hyatt, into Facebook? What are you having people do? And maybe a related question, one of the points of resistance that someone brought up is mindfulness seems like a personal activity. So the idea of giving work time to actually practice is a source of resistance that that person is facing. So what practices are you doing, and what's the case for doing them at work?
Yeah, so at Facebook, I'm right now offering the Search Inside Yourself as a program out of the mindfulness group. A mindfulness group, just so you know, is an employee-run program. So it's a kind of think of it as a club activity for employees. There are about over 1,000 members inside the mindfulness group, so there's a lot of interest in it. So in terms of the practices, outside of the SIY training that I offer, we run the weekly meditation sittings in different buildings, in different offices. The point is to make the meditation, or people can call it attention training, however they want to call it. We want to make it as accessible as possible. So it's offered by our mindfulness group, the co-leaders, in different various locations, various timing, so that people can just walk in, and then when they need it, they can just sit with us. And it's a guided meditation. Sometimes it's half guided, sometimes fully guided too. So that's the one program also that we are running as well. And we bring in speakers, and then right now we're working with the communities, so nonprofit organizations, who bringing them into Facebook so that we can also volunteer to bring this mindfulness activity by engaging the employees as well, so that people can feel more connected to the community. Our mission is to connect the people online, but also I want to emphasize the point that the offline connection is really, the human connection is the foundation of everything. So that's also as a group what we're trying to do. And that point about spending personal time, the work hours on meditation or participating in these activities, I do also get a lot of questions and some resistance around it too. But the way I always kind of frame it is that I want to be skillful in this context too. Like when I say that this is a good for people who are coming to the class, they want to help. They want to help from me to frame this to their managers as they spend the work hours. And I always frame it that this is helpful for you to increase attention span and also your productivity. So that's one way of practically framing it. And then I also provide the data that Sleep offers so that they can use that. And at the same time, I use a lot of testimonials from other previous participants as well. A lot of people who have gone through my classes at SLI and Facebook, they internally share a lot of their learnings and takeaways, and that has been a great sort of a support. And they can attest to the impact of it, that what it had on them individually and then in their team. So I also use that as a sort of evidence so that people can frame it up better way, so that they don't feel resistance either from their team or manager or from themselves as they spend this personal time for SRI training or any other programs that we've done.
Thank you. Yves, what about you?
Yeah. So Steph just helped me. So the first part of the question was, what are the practices we teach? And the second part was?
Have you encountered any resistance about the idea of using work time to train mindfulness?
Yeah. So the practices that we teach, I mean, we do teach the dedicated mindfulness practices where we talk about focused attention, we talk about open awareness. I usually selfishly bring a little bit of metta in it as well sometimes. So we do teach in some of the more formal ways. But like I said, the more powerful thing are the integrated practices that we teach. And they're really the ones that people actually also work with. They're very accessible to them. And probably the one that really works best, and I see it in a lot of our hotels, is a minute to arrive. So what Rich did with us at the beginning of the meeting, where he spent a minute for us all to arrive together and really get us all in here, that works really well. Because I think the times where I've got 1 or 2 meetings a day are over. I think many of us, whether they're in the field, in the hotels, in the offices, they have meetings scheduled one after the other. And the result is, as we all experience it, I'm late for the meeting, I'm running in the meeting, I'm not prepared. It takes me 5 or 10 minutes until my head is really in that meeting. And by the time I'm really there, the meeting is already nearly finished and I'm running late for my next meeting. And I have one of our hotels in France who's actually adopted a really nice way of dealing with that. They say, as much as we can, we're going to start the meeting with a minute to arrive, which then is going to allow everybody to arrive and actually start the meeting very quickly. And then they take off 10 minutes at the end of the meeting because they say, we're going to start earlier anyway now, so we may as well give you 10 minutes back at the end that allows you to be fully present as you go to the next meeting. I thought it was a brilliant idea. I hate that it wasn't my idea, but it was a really good idea and it made it very practical. And even better is we don't even talk about mindfulness or meditation. It's just a ritual. And I think that's a bit where you have to bring it into the workplace, is allow people, help them to create rituals. Another great practice we teach is 3 breath, which is literally 3 breath that helps you to just calm your mind. Very powerful before you go into a conversation or you feel overwhelmed. We tell people just create little rituals. Maybe don't pick up the phone to call somebody, but actually go and walk and see them. And as you walk there, just take a deep breath. Or if you print something, go to the printer and pick up whatever you have printed. And as you walk to the printer, take a couple of deep breaths. Or when you go to lunch, maybe as you walk to lunch, just spend a minute or so to think about mindfulness and mindful eating. We're in an industry where food, unfortunately, sometimes loses the value because we're always around food, and it's a very valuable skill to teach people how grateful we should be to actually have access to food. So it's really the integrated practices where we would even encourage people. We also work with a well-being framework in our organization. Hyatt has this well-being strategy where we talk about feel, fuel, and function. And under feel, this whole emotional well-being is absolutely critical. So to the question, do we allow people at work to practice? Yes, they should. I think a lot of people wouldn't, maybe. For a lot of people, this is still very personal. But within what we try to preach in the company, absolutely. If people want to use mindfulness, like we allow them to go to a gym for their physical well-being, we should also allow them to look after their mental well-being. Absolutely.
Yeah. And just to also clarify for the listeners, Yves was talking about integrated practices and dedicated practices and things like focused attention or 3 breaths. These are actually all different practices that we teach in the SIY curriculum. And so Yves is, I think, referencing those, and they're specifically designed to be micro practices and integrated practices, meaning things that are either short duration that can be, and also can be practiced in the flow, in the rhythms and routines of a normal work day. And then the dedicated practice, of course, is the formal training of the mind, of meditation, of mindfulness, practices like focused attention that we also teach in our curriculum. So there's a very concrete and specific set of tools, techniques, practices, again, that are either short span, that are integrated, or dedicated, and I think that's some of what we've been discussing here. Any last comments or questions, Steph?
Yeah, one interesting point that has come up is kind of referring to other organizations and industry leaders to help build the case. So someone gave the great example of Bill Gates is now meditating several times a day. He used to think it was woo-woo, and now he sees the benefits of it. Are there any other organizations that you've kind of, or examples you've brought in to help you build the case as you've talked internally and gathered support for your initiatives?
In the case of Facebook, because of the tech industry, the nature, and then it's predominantly engineers too. So it always helps how it helps out engineering organizations. So I use a lot of the examples that what Google did actually. At the same time, I want to I kind of bring other like very different industry examples too, such as like sports, because of the nature of the hyper competition is pretty similar to, I think, the tech industry. So that also helps to have some frame of reference from different perspective. Yeah.
Yves, what about you?
Well, I'm an avid reader, and I think that a couple of years ago, I picked up a book that was called Mindfulness in Organizations. I think it was Geller who wrote it. And that was actually what brought me to Search Inside Yourself at the time. And I still follow what organizations do. Our head office in the US, of course, we use the case studies like Aetna that help us on how they brought mindfulness into their organization. Me being based here in Europe, I often pick the brain of my friend Peter Bostelmann at SAP, who, like myself, one stage really started from scratch, bringing this into the organization. I talk a lot to my fellow teachers who teach a lot in other organizations. And I think a very big learning for me as well is when I go and teach in other organizations, to learn how does it resonate there, because I'm learning every time. I was teaching with a colleague of mine a few months ago in a very large insurance company, and I kept on writing down things. I said, Jesus, these things they're telling me, I could do this with my company as well. And I think it's just ongoing learning that you have as you interact with other companies. And I don't think there's maybe the perfect company, but every company has something you can learn from.
Wonderful. I'm aware that we're almost at time, and before we kind of ended up, I know there's probably many more questions online that did not get addressed, and we have such a limited amount of time. I know there's literally dozens of questions we're seeing through the chat. A couple of things, we just wanted to give you points of contact and actually a little bit more kind of information and even metrics that like Miroo and Yves were talking about. So Steph, if you could you just tell us a little bit about some of the follow-up actions here?
Sure, we're really excited to share some of these resources with you. So this has been recorded, as you may have noticed, so we'll be sharing a recording of this webinar. And with that, we'll also be sharing this new program impact report. So everyone who's thinking about metrics and how do you actually show the return, this is a report showing the impact. It is specifically of the Search Inside Yourself program, but it's a great way to make the case for a tangible impact that a mindfulness-based emotional intelligence program can really have in an organization. We'll also be sharing an SIY journey guide. So for people that are that internal champion like Yves and Miroo, it's a great resource to kind of work through some considerations and give you some tips and advice. And then we're also here for you. So I'll actually put this in the chat, but if you're in a similar position and want some support for how you might bring Search Inside Yourself or a similar program to your organization, please do book a session with a Search Inside Yourself engagement manager. So you can grab a time on their calendar, probably with my colleague Sarah Hunt, who's on this webinar, or Abby Olmsted. And they're great resources to help just give you advice for how to get started as well.
Yeah.
So that will be all coming in an email to you probably tomorrow.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that here at the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, which is affectionately known, as you might have surmised, as SILI, S-I-Y-L-I. So at SILI, we are a nonprofit organization really with the mission of making mindfulness and emotional intelligence tools practical and accessible, period. So our aim is to really make these tools available broadly to communities and organizations around the world. So please do reach out if you're interested. And as we're almost at the end, I would just ask our esteemed friends and guests here, Yves, Miroo, any last words of advice or suggestions for the listeners?
From my experience, this is, as Yves mentioned too, this is a long journey too. And if you're bringing mindfulness into any organizations, I think, either small or big, I personally have a lot of moments during the day, and that's when I can really use as a practice opportunity that I get like disheartened because I don't really get the traction that I need, or I don't see this movement actually moving fast enough. So I think this is advice for myself, but also I want to share with you, which is don't get too discouraged if it happens. Just let us remind ourselves it's a long journey, and when we feel like we're just making one person happy, I think that's actually a great achievement too. So yeah, that's what I want to share. Let us keep ourselves in a good spirit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yves?
Actually, somebody told me something funny today. It was more of a question. It says, Yves, you must be practicing a lot of mindfulness in order to bring mindfulness into the company. Because yes, you do need a bit of resilience. You do, and you need to be convincing that this is something that you believe in. This doesn't work as an initiative. This can't just be something where you want to use it to paint your company pink and then everything is fine. There's hard work behind it. I think you have to be committed and dedicated to it. You have to live it, because then it's not an initiative. Then it's really a life skill you can teach. That was definitely one of my learnings as well.
Great. Well, I thank you both for taking the time and sharing your insights and journey. And I thank you all who've been on this call for your time and your attention. Please reach out. We're here to help and support you in any way possible. So all the best to you as you explore this journey, as we're hearing about bringing mindfulness and integrating it into your organization. Thanks, everybody, and I hope to stay in touch. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.